We now welcome our second panel, and our first panelist is the Honorable Shawn Skelly, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today to discuss matters related to professional military education and the National Defense Strategy. I thank the subcommittee for its part in sustaining a dialogue to discuss congressional ideas and concerns as well as DoD initiatives. Last December, our staff briefed the subcommittee on how the department has addressed shortcomings in PME and JPME as identified in the NDS. We plan to provide a follow-up report addressing your questions by June 15th. And as you have my written statement, I'll briefly summarize it. Since the start of the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Austin has made clear that DoD will invest in our most significant strategic advantage, our people. In the newly released 2022 NDS, Secretary Austin emphasized three overarching ways in which we'll ensure our national security: integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building enduring advantage. Investing in the military education of our service members supports all three initiatives and is particularly crucial for building enduring advantage for the future joint force. Where training prepares our service members for certainty, PME prepares them for uncertainty. The goal of PME is to create leaders who can achieve intellectual overmatch against adversaries. That overmatch demands a system that prepares service members to address all contingencies. Unique to our institutions, PME provides officers with the opportunity to learn the state-of-the-art in military strategy and operational planning, which will continue to stand as the prerequisites to an understanding of the nature and conduct of warfare. PME also provides service members with the skills and knowledge to make sound decisions in progressively demanding command and staff assignments. It ensures they're ready for the uncertainty they'll face throughout their military career by providing critical knowledge on the ethos, culture, and core values of their service, the technical and tactical skills appropriate to how that service wages war, and most importantly, the wisdom and judgment to be applied in a broad range of situations across domains, theaters, and in both joint and combined operations with allies and partners. But military education policy is more than staff and war colleges. It's about continuous learning across all points of service, such as strengthening the ability of the services and future leaders to lead rapid adaptation and innovation, and to understand the potential use of all types of disruptive technologies. In a significant advance reflecting DoD's increased emphasis on PME, last month, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness approved the first ever department-wide policy for military education. The policy details the structure for providing guidance to the services about curriculum and outcomes that graduates of military education programs should achieve, while preserving the impact and agility of our PME system that comes from empowering our institutions. This includes service-governed PME, chairman-guided joint PME, the service academies, and professional development opportunities, such as graduate education, fellowships, and training with industry. The policy establishes an oversight governance structure to assess PME effectiveness and evaluate the department's return on investment in military education by adopting an outcomes-based approach. Developing authentic assessments of what our officers and enlisted members can do with their knowledge will change the requirements from graduation from attended and graduated to meaningful standards, providing more granular data that supports talent management and ensures an appropriate return on investment. The instruction also promotes the integration of wargaming into the military education curriculum, advancing the Secretary's call for enhanced strategic thinking across the force by providing avenues for military personnel to practice their leadership, creativity, and problem-solving skills in scenarios closely resembling the national security challenges facing the nation today. Finally, the department must develop leaders that are responsible for taking care of our people, including tackling sexual assault and other harmful behaviors in the force. We're working to implement the training and education recommendations of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military across the department. PME helps forge the most professional fighting force in the world. Looking forward, DoD will increase the links between education and talent management, continuous learning, and professional development to enable intellectual overmatch against our competitors. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions that you or the ranking member may have, and thank you for your continuing support of the women and men of our armed forces.
Thank you, Honorable Skelly. We'll now hear from Vice Admiral Stuart Munch, the Director of Joint Force Development the Joint Staff J7.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, including those that might be participating virtually. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and further appreciate the support that Congress has provided for the funding of professional military education, as well as your oversight and your feedback. PME, of course, is critical, and I include in it knowledge, skill sets, critical thinking, and a network of like-minded individuals to the future success of our armed forces. Our current system largely stems from the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, further advanced by Representative Skelton's panel in 1990. That's resulted in a five-phase continuum for PME. Of that, the subset of joint professional military education has three parts of that continuum, and that's intermediate level, senior level, and then the general and flag officer training and education. We recently also have added enlisted professional military education, which I know was raised by the prior panel. We're currently undergoing a transformation in PME driven by the 2018 National Defense Strategy. That resulted rather quickly in the Joint Chiefs vision for guidance for professional military education and talent management. That vision then was codified in policy through the Officer Professional Military Education Policy, which we refer to typically as OPMEP. Recently here, a few months ago, also released the vision for enlisted PME, developing enlisted leaders for tomorrow's wars. And then that further for policy was ensconced in the Enlisted Professional Military Education Policy, or EPMEP. PME is focused on achieving the intellectual overmatch in order to have the warfighting advantage that we need to get against the adversary. Paired with that needs to be talent management so that the right students are attending and the right faculty are teaching. It also requires that we have a rigorous cycle of planning, executing, assessing, and then applying the feedback from what we've learned in that assessment to the subsequent planning cycle. That has not always been present in past PME, and with the effort on outcomes-based military education, we are now getting at that, where the objectives are more rigorous, the execution is being tracked closely. We've established metrics in order to be able to do assessments, and then, of course, applying that to make it better as we go on. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate my thanks and also state that education is a force multiplier, and by way of maritime analogy, it's like a rising tide that raises all ships. So thanks again for your continued support, and we look forward to your feedback and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both. Admiral, does the department survey PMA graduates about their experience with the program and whether it prepares them for future jobs?
Yes, students are surveyed.
Is it anonymous?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, they can volunteer their own identity if they would like.
How about the supervisor's views of whether PME sufficiently prepared their direct reports?
Yes, the war colleges do surveys. As was discussed in the prior panel, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the intellectual attainment due to attending a war college versus learning on their own, self-educating, versus their life experiences. But we do the surveys, and we try to make those distinguishing characteristics identifiable.
Would you share some of those surveys with the committee, please?
At a later time, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
All right, thank you. Assistant Secretary, based on what you heard from the first panel, what do you believe we should be doing relative to the mix in administration and the faculty?
Madam Chairwoman, that's a great question as to faculty makeup is one that I don't have much experience in with regard to the execution of my responsibilities. As selection of faculty and the mix in there is with regard to the owning institution, the governing institution of that school, whether that be a war college or a staff college. What we do is we do set the policies in there, but we don't actually get involved with the selection of the actual professors.
No, I understand that, but you could certainly recommend that a third of the faculty or a third of the administration be persons who are not retired military or military.
With regard to the balance, yes, ma'am, we could, and we'd have to examine that to see where we would think we do an evaluation. We might include that in our next, in a future upcoming study to see what a proper mix could be.
So the widespread perception that it's hard to earn an A at JPME, but even harder to get a C, feeding the notion that somehow you go there, you don't necessarily have to read the material, you got to show up and you'll be successful. How do we deal with, now that may be an older perception, maybe there's already been enough changes so that that's not going on, but to hear the previous testimony from Dr. Freeze, someone was actually going to another college to get a master's and also coming to the War College for, I guess, a program that was not going to represent a master's was kind of surprising to me.
It is to me as well, Madam Chair, and I wonder about the implications that having a dual track process within our war colleges might complicate accreditation for the side where degrees would be conferred. To have a mix of students potentially in some classes and on separate tracks in other classes, and how that might impinge upon the academic rigor for all, and how that might impact accreditation attainment. And I also wonder about creating two tracks. I know some of our allied partners have different tracks where folks can opt into a non-career track. As a former aviator, I often wondered about that because those folks tend to stay in the cockpit for a while, and would that be advantageous? And we're confronted with that challenge. Would I go after that? And I wonder how we would create a segregation. Within our system's not really set up. You're either tracking towards command until you're not, until you might find yourself in a tour or two that signals that you're not going to promote to 06 or 07 and beyond. But I would wonder about how we would adopt such a system into our current paradigm.
So Admiral Munch, what percentage of the curriculum is wargaming?
It varies, and if I could broaden the definition of wargaming to include other forms of practical learning, typically it's between a quarter and a third of what goes on.
How do you think we can make it more attractive as an assignment for high-performing officers who would have much to impart to their junior officers?
There's a series of issues there, ma'am. One of them is depending on the particular warfare specialty of officers, that can be very demanding in terms of the practical skills in operating what they operate. For example, pilots with jet aircraft, submariners with their submarines. And as a result of that, there's this tension between the time that needs to be devoted to developing the expertise and experience to operate those platforms safely and with warfighting expertise versus time spent doing something else while coming up in your career. And so there's where oftentimes you'll find people have to do night and weekend work in order to get the joint professional military education or the master's degree that was just discussed, because there isn't time in the career. So what the services other than the Navy do is that they make the Staff and Command College a screening mechanism for their best officers, as well as the War College, which is typically at the post-command level. The Navy's not had that culture to do that, and as a result of that have not had the same level of quality students that the others have had. So there's a policy choice to be made there. The Marine Corps made this transformation when General Gray was Commandant of the Marine Corps. He made it very firm. He was shifting the policy. There were a few that didn't believe that he was as serious as he was, and then they essentially lost their career.
So the GAO pointed out that the Navy was the only service that was not participating in JPME. Has that changed?
They do participate in PME. I think the GAO report was pointing out that they don't send sufficient number of students to the sister war colleges to be students and faculty to allow the acculturation that we're looking for.
So you stand out by not doing that. And is that going to change? Or is there some philosophy behind not participating?
There are efforts ongoing to do better in that. I can't speak for the Navy at this point because I've been on the Joint Staff for 2 years, but I'm aware of there is activity ongoing, and that was also responded to in the OSD letter to you all.
All right. My time has expired. Ranking Member?
Vice Admiral Munch, my understanding is you have a master's from Oxford, is that correct?
I do.
Can I ask you, at what point in your career were you able to do that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so this is unusual. I wouldn't take it as the normal path. It was immediately after leaving the Naval Academy through a scholarship.
Okay. So you were actually good as an undergraduate, unlike me, who wasted a lot of time.
Well,
yeah.
I was from a small state and had to work hard, sir.
Absolutely. I guess, and we have a series of programs, and the Marine Corps is actually catching up. The Navy's been in the lead with the Air Force of sending people to go get PhDs at purely civilian institutions and then bringing them back and utilizing them. There were at least 2 active duty service members in my PhD program at Georgetown, one of which went back to be a strategist in the Pentagon, super smart guy. The other actually went to the Air War College down in Maxwell, I believe, right? Just both brilliant guys. Are you aware of these sort of programs? Do we feel like we're getting a good return on that investment? Because that's an even bigger investment, right? I mean, you're sending people away for potentially 2 years, and then they got to figure out how to finish their dissertation. That's a huge investment that we darn sure have to make sure we're capitalizing it on the back end. I'll maybe start with you, Admiral, and then Assistant Secretary.
It's uncommon around the Joint Force. It's more common in the non-maritime services where you'll see that. I think there's maybe a little bit more room in the career path to do something like that, as well as acceptability in selection boards as a desirable characteristic. There have been programs in the past in the maritime services that did more of that. It's just not very present right now.
Congressman, I think the new DODI, the Instruction 1322.35, which sets the conditions to create a data-informed approach to drive the return on investment evaluation at the departmental level. So the services have their reasons for pursuing it historically, culturally, as the Admiral alluded to. We need to understand how they're doing it differently, see what they think they're getting for return, and what the department believes that the department's return on investment across the Joint Force should be there. We don't have the wherewithal to do that today. The question of PhD attainment came up in my meeting with the chairwoman yesterday, and we have to go do a data call on that, and it will take some time to bring back the numbers as they exist right now from the service military manpower systems.
And on that front, I very much appreciate you referencing my request for information in your testimony. I look forward to reviewing that data. Again, the intent is just to assure that we're making good use of those graduates, right? I think there are 2 kind of related issues that we're trying to figure, well, I guess maybe 3 that are coming out here. One is whether we are selecting the best and the brightest to go to these institutions. The second is whether the institutions themselves are on par with their civilian counterparts who have a much fancier name or credential, right? Like, let's just be honest. We had the previous panel talking about what it means to have a Harvard degree versus National War College. No offense to the National War College, although Princeton's better than Harvard. Just gonna throw that out there. And then the third, and perhaps most important, is how we're tracking our utilization of graduates. And it seems like right now you don't have the ability to pull up the numbers very quickly.
We certainly do not.
Okay. I just would argue in 2022, technologically, there's no barrier to it. We should be able to interrogate the data routinely in order to assess, okay, how are the services doing? Or reach down and say, okay, what are the report cards telling us about how our people are performing? Not in real time, but near real time.
Congressman, I'm sure you're aware of the emphasis that the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary have put on data across the department, that all data is available for the department's use. Recently, the Deputy Secretary directed that all models that include that data are also available for the department's use. We have to go there. We are making our way there. We're imparting that lesson, that expectation across the department, and I'm personally looking forward to taking the military education enterprise in that direction, because we're learning lessons as to how to drive accountability to make data available, to bring it together, because it's not just one service's data and displaying that, it's how you do the relationships, and then create that power in there. I know from my own experience, sort of the 3 questions that you raised, I saw all of them. I asked to go to Naval War College, to College of Naval Command and Staff, and the only reason it was entertained because I had time. Is what the detailer thought. And I had in my shop in the Pacific Command, I had a Hindi speaker who went to the Indian War College, and his counterpart in Central Command had gone to the Pakistani War College. It was back and forth. I had an Urdu speaker for India, and they had a Hindi speaker for Pakistan, because they didn't get assigned to where their imparted government-provided skills and training had taken them to. We have a history of not making the most out of that and being able to account for it beyond their payback tour. You get your education, you owe several years. But what do we do after that? Because we'll send you to some place to try and squeeze that out of you. But how do we know what we're getting as to who makes 3 stars, who makes more, who goes to particular commands that suit their training, or they just happen to wind up someplace? Especially with regard to cyber, AI, and other technologies that are emerging. We can only impart exquisite knowledge to so many. We have to ensure that they're put in places to utilize that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm out of time. Before I forget, however, one of those classmates I mentioned, my understanding is he's retiring soon. His name is Jeff Donathorn. So wherever you are, Jeff, you are one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever met, and a patriot, and you've served your country very admirably. So I'm going to miss your retirement ceremony, but maybe this will get to you through the ether.
All right, Ms. Bice, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, and I appreciate the witnesses for their time this afternoon. Let me start with, it was mentioned actually in the previous panel, but I want to kind of circle back around and get your perspective. One of the key tasks of our nation's war colleges is to develop senior joint leaders who can successfully master cross domains of ground, air, space, and importantly, cyber operations. While we have made some positive strides, I feel strongly that our nation's warfighters need greater opportunities to expand their familiarity with cyber operations. So my question to the panel, does our nation's JPME curriculum do enough to prepare future senior military leaders to oversee operations in cyberspace, or that have a cyberspace component to them?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We know we have to do better because of the increasing importance and near dominance of cyberspace. Every operation we have relies upon the cyber environment. Every potential conflict or interaction that we might have with a peer adversary will certainly involve cyber in some way, shape, or form. Presently, we are studying, which is not action, but we are studying to learn where we have to do better on cyber education, and we are responding to the, I believe it's the committee's desire to learn more about NDU and cyber, and we have an in-depth study going on that right now. I would say from my personal experience in my 9 months in the department, is sitting on the department's cyber council, it's a confluence of the career civilian professionals who have the information operations, the information systems, the cyber knowledge, along with the senior operators and the cyber smart people, where we have to create a combined departmental effect to be able to operate in these environments. I have behind me my Deputy Assistant Secretary for Force Education and Training, and one of her key tasks is learning how to create literacy on a range of topics across the force, and how we understand what individual service members need based on whatever their specialty may be. What do they need to know about cyber? What do they need to know about a changing climate, data analytics, and also take that in a continual way across their increasing rank and responsibilities in there. We think it's key, and we are pursuing our ability to create that capability within our professional military education enterprise.
Thank you very much. To follow up on that, what can Congress do to further expand the opportunities for military personnel in this area of study? My colleague, Mr. Gallagher, and I have a focus on cyber, and so this is something I think that we haven't put enough emphasis on, but can now. So what can Congress be doing to help in this realm?
First, ma'am, I think we have a decent revisit rate on our curriculum between the services with the curriculum that they're responsible for, where the joint staff informs joint professional military education, those requirements. I believe our previous expert panel referenced cyber education, and it's the demands that the Department of Defense, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, places upon the system to be responsive to that. And we certainly rate cyber as an area of the highest importance for our force to understand and to be able to operate in that realm.
Vice Admiral, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yes, I would offer there are a couple of challenges in cyber that make it a bit different from the traditional domains. One is that it is a very rapidly changing field at all times. And so at any point you might think you have a grasp of what is in the realm of the possible with cyber, and very quickly it changes. So it requires, as individuals, a revisit rate that's very high relative to the other domains to really understand what it is capable of doing. With that high visit rate, there also is then a shortage of personnel who know how to do this that are in uniform. It's typically not a core specialty like it would be to be a pilot or a ship driver, but it's a secondary specialty. And we just don't have enough of those people. And when you don't have a critical mass, then you're not spreading the wealth of the knowledge through interaction throughout the joint force. So in terms of what Congress could do, I think it's a bit of it is just the nature of the beast in that it's a very fast-moving field. But we're trying to make cyber more robust in all aspects of PMA in order to grow that mass of people who really understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me just quickly follow up with, I think it's crucial that we find those service members that have this background and develop them and keep them in the service, because every day that goes by, the cyber component of operations becomes more and more critical. And without those individuals, we'll continue to fall behind. Madam Chair, thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. I have just a couple of more questions. We'll allow for a second round. Assistant Secretary, we have required, I believe in the NDAA of 2 years ago, that women, peace, and security be included in the curriculum. And there's growing recognition that that is a key component to successful national security. What are you doing at your level to make sure that this is, in fact, not lost in the process?
Excuse me, ma'am, the mic is winning. Women, peace, and security is a curriculum area. If I could ask the Admiral to weigh in, I know the Joint Staff has a priority on it, or has it in its rank of priorities for curricula across the Joint Force. But we agree it is NDS, the former NDS directed, and I believe it's within my colleagues in OSD policy that responsibility to ensure that the Joint Force is meeting the requirements of the demands of women, peace, and security.
But let's say it doesn't happen. Let's say it just falls off. Who then is accountable to make sure that that is included in the curricula?
Ma'am, that's where governance would come into play. That we have, it wouldn't just be me as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness who has responsibility for the lead for our education programs. It's to ensure that the entirety of the Office of the Secretary brings all of its equities to bear, where it would be the principal cyber advisor to the Secretary. It would be the Undersecretary for Policies folks who have space responsibilities as well as cyber, as well as those that have WPS as an example, to ensure that those that they have subject lead on are being accounted for within the education enterprise, which is where I don't mean to beat the dead horse of the new instruction, providing a data foundation that we can then take into a governance model and where we can use the authority of the Undersecretary for Personnel, who can order much of what needs to be done responsibly through the department. And if we can't reach resolution, we already have a standing forum to reach the Deputy Secretary of Defense on workforce matters, which is what education would fall under in that way. But it would be my responsibility as the lead for the education enterprise to ensure that all those equity stakeholders bring their issues to the fore and ensure that they're being held to account through our wherewithal within PNR.
Admiral, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, ma'am. So the service war colleges would be accountable through the services. National Defense University would be accountable through us on the joint staff. And through the outcomes-based military education effort, we do a regular assessment on the curriculum to make sure that it includes the requirements and it is relevant and current. Additionally, just for JPME, there is an accreditation process that's separate from the accreditation that go to the other war colleges that are done by civilian accreditors. And so that's another item we look at for the JPME accreditation.
So the 2018 NDS recognized that professional military education had come to be valued more for the institutional requirement of having attended a program and received credit than for the knowledge, skills, and abilities fostered and developed. What are we doing to change that? Assistant Secretary.
Chairwoman, that is what the new DoD instruction is all about, is the direction that all programs will be objectives-based military education that will then result in data, which we then have to, I mentioned it in my opening statement, it's talent management. It's not just the data itself, and governing through that data is not the whole solution. We have to have a personnel management, talent management system that can understand the attributes that all our service members bring when they assess, whether through their high school graduation or their bachelor's degree, what we impart to them through the education programs they go through, either at the tactical level when they're more junior, then when they go to staff colleges and war colleges, what we intend to impart to them, what they take away, what they demonstrate through their competencies in there. That's the way we have to get after it. It's the data, it's the objectives of the education, understanding the impact of it, and then attributes to the individuals to create an appreciation of the force and whether we have the sufficient knowledge and wherewithal for the positions that need it. It has to be a continual cycle.
The first panel talked about creating greater rigor in the actual curriculum. From your vantage point, how do you make sure that in each of these war colleges there is the requisite rigor in terms of the program?
Ma'am, I think it would be through the objectives that are set and how they're measured and what the services believe they need out of them, what the Joint Staff believes we need from JPME and an OSD assessment, and revisiting those based on, you raised the point about the surveys from those receiving commands, the senior service staffs, the combatant commands. Are they feeling satisfied? And through any place where we have oversight, is the force performing to meet the demands of the mission and the environment in the world at that time? We can never stand still. It's about continuous process improvement.
So my last question, the previous panel talked about how if you bring in a lot of retired military officers, they are teaching from their experience. So they're providing an educational experience that relies on yesterday's war and not the future. How are we going to make sure that we keep the curriculum looking at the future of war and not what's happened before? I'll start with you, Admiral.
Yes, ma'am. So there's really a broader issue in the federal employment in that there is a strong benefit for veterans in hiring practices, and that does occur also then in the war colleges that results in veterans having a larger preponderance than maybe they would otherwise because of the point scoring scheme and hiring federal workers and the benefits that veterans get. So it's a bit of a broader issue than just PME. But how do we ensure that they're focused on the future? Well, traditionally in academia, publishing is a key metric for promotions within the academic institution. There could be more rigor that is added there. And then I mean, it's not been in my experience that they're all backward looking. There is some value in history and in experience, but and to tie to some of your earlier questions here about the value of the War College and the rigor, we did go through a period of a couple decades where we did not have an adversary that was especially strong or existential against us. And there's nothing like a threat to focus an institution. And so along with this transformation that we've described, there's a deep-seated transformation ongoing because of the students' interest in being ready for their responsibilities to fight China if that comes, or Russia.
So does that mean there's a China hands in the future?
I don't know about that. Anytime we create a sidetrack like that, it tends to only last for a while, and then the larger needs of the service eventually overcome that, and that chokes it off. So I'd be concerned about losing quality people to a
Well, I guess I
program
would
like that.
disagree with you, because I think, as we're seeing in many of our other entities, building a Russia and China focus is critical to building the kind of talent we want and the leadership we want. Assistant Secretary, your final words, and I've really exceeded mine, and then I'll give you the opportunity.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I share the Admiral's concerns with regard to a hands program that could unduly silo off folks. I believe wholeheartedly we have to raise the rigor with regard to our competitors and the specifics. And we have to focus, I think, in three parts: strategic competition writ large, though I don't think any new strategic competitors are probably coming out of left field anytime soon, but it's the basic demands of strategic competition. What's particular to the China problem set, China's unique attributes in their military, what their military presents, as well as likewise Russia. Russia is likely not to leave the stage anytime soon. We certainly need folks who can speak the language and who understand the tactics and what are appropriate to the positions that require a level of increased understanding and specific knowledge, whether it be intelligence, operations, planning, and the like. I believe that's appropriate. Personally, I would like to see, and I will look after this to understand what the lessons learned and evaluation of the success of the AFPAC HANDS program was, because, as the Admiral said, it was a large effort that just about the time it gained real momentum and mass, it got sidelined and stovepiped. And I have acquaintances that I served with, squadron mates, who wound up adrift with a language and an expertise, and they had done one tour, and they still had a career, a good chunk of a career in front of them. And that way, I'll always be wary of how we can impinge upon the service's ability to make use of the talent available to it if we put it off in a direction that loses favor with leadership.
All right. Ranking member, final question?
Thank you. Well, my understanding, to pick up where you left off, I thought we were making changes to JPME to reflect China as the so-called pacing threat. Many quibble with that language.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The idea being that, go back to Rooster's days and every naval officer could tell you everything about the Soviet Navy. We need a similar level of expertise for the PLA Navy, right? Are you hamstrung by Goldwater-Nichols in making those changes?
Sir, I don't believe so. I was just down on the Norfolk waterfront with a soon-to-deploy destroyer crew and captain, and they were talking about Russian and Chinese assets in the same ways that, as you mentioned, as we Cold Warriors once did. The Soviet ships became Russian ships, so the same with the aircraft. But they had that focus on the high-end adversary, as I remember having myself.
And then shifting gears, I want to highlight what I think is one pocket of excellence that I found interesting. SOCOM has partnered with MIT and created this course where they're sending 06s to a short-term, tailored course, not a master's degree granting course. It could be a micro-master's if that's now a thing, where the idea is not to turn them into technologists, but give them basic fluency in AI, ML, quantum, cyber. That's intriguing to me. Are you aware of this effort?
I am not. I will become so after this immediately.
I'm sure if MIT will answer your call, Assistant Secretary Skelly. I was very impressed by the idea. Again, we're not creating a separate thing. MIT was eager to partner with SOCOM in this regard, and it just seemed like a great symbiosis between DoD and civilian higher ed.
And Congressman, I certainly applaud it because it goes back to the point I made about literacy. What do you need to know for the position you're going to, and how can we impart that right amount for the job to you in that time and see it coming to make you available, that you're going to go to a particular field or a particular staff or service level position, that we know what you need to do, especially with AI, cyber, machine learning, and the like, because it's coming into play to how we do everything. Our service members are doing it themselves in the course of their jobs, where they can get the permissions to bring those capabilities to bear. It's much like we were when we were all coding, not I wasn't, but much younger folks were all coding 15, 20 years ago. They're doing data analytics now on their own work and trying to bring that to bear the performance of their duties.
And what would be in light of the previous discussion we had about academic rigor, what would be the barriers to posting class rankings, on making that publicly available? Are there some concerns but beyond embarrassing people that don't perform well, would there be some legal barrier or regulatory barrier I'm unaware of?
So there's some Privacy Act issues with displaying grades and rankings like that.
Interesting.
That's
follow up
in
on that.
legislation, yeah.
You may be right. I'm not willing to just accept that necessarily. I don't think it would be a bad idea to sort of post that information publicly. I don't know.
The other way to get at the issue I think you're after here is to
Yeah.
do actual fitness reports for students based on their performance.
Or use a carrot instead of a stick, right? Give the top 10% or 25% graduates preferential treatment in terms of their follow-on assignment, right? That could be a powerful incentive.
Yep.
Since I have a minute and 36 seconds left, I've already crossed the threshold of half-baked ideas, and we may have to wait another 5 years before we have a PME hearing. Then I will sort of lay out a series of more provocative statements. My emerging view is that if we're going to try and give someone a highly technical skill set, we should probably just send them to a civilian institution rather than recreating something on our own. We probably get more bang for our buck. And might create interesting friendships and relationships with civilian experts in AI, quantum, or advanced engineering. As we look towards what the military can do uniquely well, I don't know. I mean, ask yourself if our current programs would be better or worse than a year, half of which involved a writing boot camp with a sort of near religious reverence for Strunk and White, and teaching field grade officers and potential general grade officers how to write clearly and well, and another half year of intense wargaming tied directly to testing our war plans. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not asking you to answer that question, but the fact that part of you is even questioning it right now in your minds, as I know you are, means we got some work to do.
Writing boot camp, something akin to, was in my feedback to the Naval War College when I was in the middle of my combatant command tour.
Yeah.
I was not prepared to be a staff writer, staff officer in that way. There's a there, sir.
So I'd go one more than that. I would offer a three-part process. One is to institute a tutorial process where it's one professor on one student or one on two. That is expensive, but that's how you really grow critical thinking with that kind of contact. That can be, say, once a week, twice a week. And then I would do classroom work in the mornings with rigor, and then I would do practical application of the learning in the afternoon with wargaming. And then to broaden that cycle, what is learned then, much like the interwar period that was done at the Naval War College, send that learning out to the fleet, to the operating forces, to open it up to the joint force, and do a large exercise in the off-academic period in the summer to test out those ideas in order to advance war plans, send that feedback back to the war colleges, and then begin the cycle again.
If we do all these things and then outlaw the use of acronyms, the Chinese cannot beat us, I guarantee you. So,
All right. Ms. Bice, do you have any follow-on questions? You do? You're
Madam Chair, I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought. As you can tell, we both have great interest in wanting to pursue PME and JPME to get the biggest bang for our buck. This is not a year in which you can relax and enjoy your family. It shouldn't be that. Now, hopefully that has changed. But I do think there's more work that needs to be done. And I think the ranking member's suggestions are ones that we should pursue. The other thing we should also look at, we do have the military academies that are filled with fine academic teachers, professors, and maybe we need to rely on them somewhat more in terms of evaluating what we need to do differently. But we really appreciate your participation today. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Skelly. Thank you, Vice Admiral Munch. And we will stand adjourned.